Calling meeting of the Woodbridge Economic Development Commission to order at 6:07. First agenda item is to approve the June minutes. Has everyone had an opportunity to review those? Get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Steve? Second? Chatty? All in favor? Okay. Okay, chair updates. So the last time we met, I think we actually got into a little more detail on this in May. We were discussing the selection of our town planner, right? So there are a lot of consultants floating around town hall these days. And the town planner, if you remember, is designed to look at the development of an overall plan for the town, a vision, and part of that would really be our economic development plan, business attraction, retention. So they're also very involved with the POCD. We'd selected Goldman and York as that consultant, and they are still working through the details of that contract. When Mika gets here, I'll ask him if he can speak any more to it, but I really have not been very involved in those conversations. There's apparently some overlap with the work on the POCD that's taking place, and there's another consultant, SLR, right, that's heading up the POCD. There's lots of acronyms here, so hang on, right? That there is some overlap there, and that's what the holdup is on that. So I'm anticipating that we will soon get to meet with Goldman and York. My hope was they were going to be able to attend tonight, and we can kind of do an introduction and get a little feel for what their work is going to look like, the scope of work, but we are a little delayed on that. Second I had on here was just business community outreach, and we were just going back and forth a little on our visit down to Tide Cleaners, and I personally was pretty impressed with what we saw. I think they were very happy to see a large contingent from Woodbridge come out. It was signs of life, right? That's always good. Any other general impressions that folks want to share? I mean, I know we were chatting a little bit about it.
I had a comment for you for the Goldman and York
Yes.
stuff. So my contract with Rex is through June of '25.
Mm-hmm.
So, in talking to Goldman and York, I know them. And by SLR used to be Malone and McBroom. For those of you,
Right.
They rebranded.
Mm-hmm.
So as Goldman and York develops their scope, you just start. Hey, Mika. They just, as that scope is developed, you're only going to get a certain amount of hours per month out of them. So as that's developed and that's worked out with the town, what I told Mika and Scott was, I will fit in where they cannot fit in. They can't be here all the time. 25 hours a month or whatever it is. I forget what it is. But anyway, I'm here to supplement what they're doing, probably more on the business retention strategies and those things like that, because they're more land use and strategic planning developer. So they'll replace a little bit of what I've been working with you on, but I will continue. They're not going to come to every one of your meetings. They will come to some of your meetings. I will try to fit in. Give the best. Supplement what they do. That's the best way I could put it. Or say that.
Great. Yeah, Mika, we were just discussing the town planner, Goldman and York, and the POCD overlap. I don't know if there's any more you wanted to.
Well, the good news there is that there has not been any real overlap in terms of what the two of them have done. We did meet with both of them, and we met with them together. The additional good news is they know each other, they've worked with each other, so there's a synergy there that I think will work very well. The way that it was explained to us and the way that it actually will be working, the POCD information that's collected, for example, demographics, are collected on a very high level, just general type information, stuff we would like to see at SCROG, maybe a little bit more detailed as far as Woodbridge is concerned, but they're drawing the information from a lot of the same sources, things of that nature. What Goldman and York would do in the same regard is, for example, they might give us some additional detail as relates to the Beecher enrollment. They might get into additional details where even, for example, the SLR and the POCD will give a trending report on students, generally speaking, which would include our elementary school, our middle school, and our high school. Whereas Goldman and York will specify they'll give us the detail as relates specifically each of those. So we may see an overall decline in terms of student enrollment from a POCD standpoint, and there'll be some detail there that'll explain each one. But what we'll get from Goldman and York is something that's more detailed. I'm just using that as an example of what it is. So far there's not been a lot of overlap. I was particularly concerned about the demographics because they both said they were working on demographics.
Right.
And we will have consistent communication between the groups at this point in time, and so I think it'll work well from that perspective. Timeline-wise, the POCD is moving along. They've got some draft information that they're working with. They'll start working with TPZ and go from there. And Goldman and York is now that we'll go into full engagement. We had told them to hold off because we didn't want them doing things that were already done. So now they're ready to move forward, and we exchanged some information today that they're going to start working on and moving forward with. So now, starting now, I think you'll see the engagement. They'll be engaged with you folks a little bit more.
Great.
And we'll have some opportunity to really have some dialogue.
Is there a chance we could meet with them in September, even if it's, conference call or
I believe so, yes.
something on the
Yes.
small, or maybe
If
even
not-
a
if-
special meeting?
Yeah, it probably could be during the regular meeting. I don't
Okay.
think it'll be anything extensive
Right.
at that point in time, but
Okay.
we'll see where we get in the next couple of weeks.
Okay. And our involvement in the POCD process, what would that, we've never really talked about that, where EDC fits in.
All of the boards and commissions will have input into the POCD process. I think they're looking in the October-November timeframe to really set that up with all the different commissions. For my part, we're looking to set up something that we haven't done before. I'm looking to arrange for a meeting with all of the commissions, boards and commissions at the same time, at an appropriate location. So we can have some communication and some dialogue in regards to what we're looking to do from a strategic plan perspective, what's happening with different elements. That's something that both, hopefully all three of our consultants who are playing in this will engage in that as well. So, but they're specifically, from POCD standpoint, SLR indicated that they would look toward the October-November timeframe to be engaging with the commissions, which would obviously very much include this one.
Great. Okay.
Just a question, maybe a little bit off track, but how was the survey accepted by the townspeople?
The numbers were really good in terms of what we got back. In terms of what the results of it or what they indicated, no idea at all, Steve. As it stands right now, apparently in talking to them, 2% is considered good.
Oh,
So 2%, we're at 9,000 people, so figure, 180, 200.
yeah.
We actually got 650 responses,
Excellent.
647 to be exact, but we got 647 responses. So I think they were very impressed, very, very pleased with the response. And, certainly thank town people for that because they responded when we asked them to take notice, they did.
Great.
So I still think even 6% seems like a little bit, but that's just me.
It's okay.
Yeah, somebody who knows it knows it better.
Is that the sample size sufficient?
Yeah, and percentage of the total population.
Yeah.
That's good.
So, but we won't probably be seeing a lot of those results until toward the end of the year.
Okay, but they will be released.
Yep.
Okay.
Did the 6% reflect the town opinion then?
It can't be extrapolated today, yeah.
It can be, there's a statistical analysis that
Yeah.
allows,
Right,
is
because
it significant enough?
because it was open to all,
Right.
all people in the town, well, all eligible people in the town. So because of that, if you get 6% of that group, not like if you do a survey of nationwide, and there's 325 billion people in the country, then it's the sample would be you want a little bit more robust to that, but because it's a subset of all population, it's better. It brings the margin of error down because of that.
It wasn't something that was sent out to everyone, so everyone saw it necessarily. So it's something that you had to go in and you had to voluntarily kind of do
Sure.
on your own. So I think it's a good reflection in terms of participation from a town perspective, and it's as much or more than we got them so they were pleased.
Excellent.
All right. So we were just discussing the business community outreach and getting a chance to go to down to Tide Cleaners and the ribbon cutting. Tomorrow, Cliff, Mika, and myself will go to Connecticut Micro Creamery and meet with them.
Get some ice cream.
Really, one of the things, as these things come up, I'll probably just reach out and say, hey, do you want to join us here and there? We do need to watch that we don't get a quorum, right? Because then it becomes a special meeting, and so.
Keeping in mind that it depends on what you're doing. If you're not conducting business, it's
Right.
not, if you all participate in a meeting for the Board of Selectmen and you're sitting in the audience, it doesn't constitute
Okay.
a need to notice it and all of that. If you're going to discuss something as a result of it, then obviously it does.
Right.
If you have a quorum, you have to notice a meeting.
Okay.
Good.
All right, great. So, more of that, I think, going forward. Just, interact, outreach, really get a flavor for what's happening, especially as we're going to talk a little bit about 2030, right? And how that is going to impact them. That was one of the things I took away is, these folks, put a storefront up at Tide and, bought a cleaner, and they had no idea we were just on the verge of getting this grant, and we're going to, do some significant construction down there. So there's a win for that, without a doubt. Scott, did you want to talk about SCROG?
Sure.
Before we move on?
I have my notes here, and it's been a while ago, but there was a meeting at SCROG, and I can't remember the exact title of it, but it was from an economic development sort of perspective, how to get things done in small towns that may not have the expertise or the capacity. Maybe the expertise, but maybe not the capacity. And so there was two main speakers, Peter Sosa from Windsor, he was the town manager, and Mark Barnhart from Fairfield. He started off as the economic and development director, and he is the economic and development director, but he's the past town manager of that town. It started off with a premise, and the premise was housing is economic development. And so they went from there. Peter Sosa said he got 275 units in Windsor. Mark Barnhart's got like 500 and like 550 in the pipeline. I can confirm that because I took the train to the US Open, and every train stop was 5 floors over 2 units. So as I went down, there was 5 stories and 2 under for parking. So, but they really said that small towns, their recommendation is to create tutorials to onboard economic development members, build tools to educate the group coming in, make it personal, visual preferences, participation exercises, and really push the community and create this sort of robust onboarding. And so Mark had focused on that as an onboarding process because he gets new commissioners all the time, and he's in this constant process of tutorials and getting everybody up to speed, like Dale's doing to us now. But now maybe we could teach the teacher. we could become the teachers as well.
Right,
once you
the
teach
idea is
us.
to get you to the next level.
Yeah,
to
right.
take it from there.
Then they quickly, Sean Gill, Partnership for Stronger Communities, Stronger Communities. MRDA, so he was speaking about MRDA was gonna pass, MRDA did pass. MRDA, it's a bad name, right, MRDA, but a municipal redevelopment agency. And so there are new institutions out there, municipal redevelopment agencies to sort of take areas that need some development now, some new development, to redevelop it. And I did notice that it seems to have quite a nice New Haven bias in the board of directors. There's a representative from Yale on the board of directors, and there's somebody from New Haven that's on there. And so that may have a nice slant towards the New Haven area and be a resource for us as well. So
And
he spoke.
even the Laura Francis, who's going to be the executive director of SCROG, is on the board too.
Yeah.
She's an appointee.
And so I don't know if that's the governor being liking New Haven, but we have a good.
Well, there's party assignments, and she was the Republican person
Gotcha.
that they put on.
So that he commented on that. So that was good news as another resource for us. So that's about that.
Okay, great. Next agenda item is probably going to be the bulk of the conversation tonight. As Tony reminded me, it's the former CCW master plan. We need to always remember that it's the former CC Dome.
That's right.
And obviously, the bar grant approval, right, since we last met in early June, I think, you know, you look at the minutes, it was like we were still waiting for the outcome on that, so really exciting news, with the approval of bar. And now, really looking at what are the next steps to start to operationalize the bar grant, and begin work on that master plan. So from a process standpoint, one of the things I really wanted to talk about was to kick off the master plan development. There will be, per the terms of the bar agreement that you've all seen, there needs to be a steering committee established, right? And that really is kind of the beginning of the process, and from there we will engage with the selected consultant, Cooper Robertson. So I'd sent out a couple of documents on Cooper Robertson. I really have just become had a chance to take a look at them for the first time, but I know this has been kind of a long iteration. Mika, it goes back to June of 2023, I think, was the first pass that we had, and kind of an update recently, and it was a long process. So Cooper Robertson has been selected, and we're at the point now where we need to establish the steering committee.
If I could,
Yeah.
one of the, I just came up with I don't know if an analogy or a metaphor. If steering me, it's also advisory. So maybe the word is more advisory, because I think if I'm steering and I'm driving the car, right, I'm gonna, but if I'm advising, I'm sort of the backseat driver maybe. And so
Right.
the person that's actually steering it may be somebody, so maybe steering, I think
Right.
also we can focus on the word advisory as well.
Right.
Because steering gives people a lot of angst about you're steering in a particular direction in the car. Maybe we're backseat drivers that
Right.
don't necessarily.
So in section 4, under partnerships, collaboration, and leverage, I is the establishment of an advisory/steering committee.
Yeah,
So-
advisory, yeah.
Exactly.
And it's a really good point, Scott. I appreciate you bringing that up. If you watched our Board of Selectmen meeting, that was a large part of our meeting was discussion. And although I personally feel it's more a matter of semantics, it is very important to understand what exactly it's about. And it is, we've gone through steering committee, advisory committee, stakeholder committee, and whatever you want to call it. It's a group of people who will help to advise. It is important to understand that the Board of Selectmen will play a very heavy role in this, and that they will ultimately be the ones who make the decisions on this. So it is advisory in that regard as well. But it is, it's important to understand that, so.
Really, directing Cooper Robertson, right, within the confines of, here's the RFP and the bar grant and the deliverables, right? That is the role of the advisory/steering committee, okay? And ultimately, as Mika said, the decision goes to the Board of Selectmen and TPZ for that matter.
If there's zoning
If there's-
changes
if there's-
that come out of it.
If there's zoning changes that come out of
Yeah.
it. So, I asked Dale to kind of give us some insights on the development of the steering committee. As you were, intimately involved with the bar narrative, which
Yes.
becomes the document that we point to, around the definition
All
of.
right, so you have a consultant that's going to do, and I reviewed the procurement of Cooper Robertson. You sent that to Scott and to Mika and Tony to make sure that the procurement of Cooper Robinson would meet, pass muster with the bar people, because they were selected prior to.
And the bar people are the DECD.
DECD. And my
That's-
opinion was, with one exception, and we can talk about that offline, everything Cooper Robinson's doing does, the procurement of them would pass the rules of procurement, so that's a good thing. The only, I'll just put it aside, is the phase 1, and we need to talk to the state about that. But that's an easy fix, an easy add, because there's an on-call list with the state you can pick from. So, in looking at things like this.
So Dale, just like the phase 1 is the environmental
The
assessment
assessment
that
of
took place in
conditions.
2016.
And just, 30-second primer on phase ones, because I always, people, when I start talking about phase ones, phase twos, phase threes, all of a sudden eyes glaze over and
Well, because the Cooper Robertson dock has phase 1, phase 2, and they're different.
that's a process.
Exactly.
Right, the
Right.
phase one site assessment was part of the scope of the bar grant that we, was put in the grant. And that really is just like a title search of the country club site, since remediation was done however many years ago that was done. And that was put in the grant, but don't forget, it's a brownfield, it's the brownfield division of DECD that issues these grants, so there has to be at least an element of looking at that. So that really is just a title search, it's not digging holes, it's not doing any of that kind of stuff. It's looking at what's happened on the site, so God forbid there was a spill, or an oil tank ruptured and the oil went into the ground, or something like that. That did not happen, I'm sure. But you have to go through the process of checking the state fire marshal records and all the records that would give you that information. If there was something that happened, let's say, since some remediation was done, from what I understand, then there is a limited amount of digging that would have to be done. But the grant is really not about digging, it's about planning. So in terms of the steering committee, so we'll have to cross that bridge a little bit, in the coming weeks. In terms of the steering committee
Advisory committee.
huh?
In terms of the advisory
Right.
committee.
Advisory
Right, going
committee.
forward,
Yeah.
Going
strike,
forward.
strike steering.
It's a
Second.
question of facilitation of the process. Cooper Robinson's gonna run with it, they're gonna do a cost-benefit analysis, they probably need to be brought up to speed of the exact language of the bar grant to make
agree.
sure that what we represented that night at the Board of Selectors meeting, it seemed like the cost-benefit analysis was, everybody was very keenly interested in that, to justify the perhaps multiple uses that are gonna be at the country club site. Probably 2 or 3 or 4 potential things, but I think getting agreement, as opposed to what's happened in the past, will be really critical to have good data and to engage people without making a cast of 1,000 that would, where you couldn't do anything. So Cooper Robinson's gonna be let loose to do their thing, and there has to be some sort of facilitation of the advisory committee. The question will be, how many people are on the advisory committee, and who are they? Should you have a smaller group? I won't use steering, but for semantically speaking, should you have a group that's sort of the working group that has the day-to-day? Because to get everybody in the room, if you're gonna have 14 people on the advisory committee and you wanna have good balance, and like you said, the Board of Selectmen are gonna be really important part of the process, is that practical? It's a rhetorical question. So do you wanna have a smaller group, sort of a date, you can call them the steering, you don't wanna call them steering, you wanna call them action committee, or I don't know, make up a word that fits, and the advisory committee would be the town employees and things like that, because somebody's gotta facilitate the process, otherwise you're gonna get stuck in the mud a little bit.
Right.
And,
And Dale, could I just jump in a little bit about the environmental? I had a chance, and I don't know that I've been thorough in that, but going on the town's website and looking at, there's quite a significant amount of environmental work that's been done out there in evaluating the property. It's Swiss cheese. In other words, a lot of holes in it. And there's actually, a remediation plan for that property, and it relies heavily on environmental land use restrictions on that property, that
Correct.
remediation plan, which means you can't touch it. So I want to address, I know that there are townsfolk's concerns that, what chilling effect could that, what effect has that had on any proposals that have been brought to us? And I think it's important to, in this advisory committee, to have people that do have experience with properties that are contaminated, and know that the chilling effect that has on a developer. And so you sort of have to bring properties, if you really want to get the kind of development you want, you sort of have to bring them along, because they're going to factor that in. And so it has a chilling effect in that process of negotiations, and has for the town, according to Tony. So I think that's just important, that we need to, as a community, get our arms around the environmental status of that property. For instance, there's a budget item for $1 million to remediate it, a cost estimate. as I saw on the web, in the capital budget, and another $1 million to demolish the building. There's a $2 million cap charge, and when I look at the capital budget, $2 million for that country club. So I think, you know, where are we gonna come up with $2 million, and what's the plan for reuse? And, you know, you may have to do different levels of remediation depending upon your plan for
So
reuse.
there's two things to think about. Overall, I would say information is powerful here,
Yep.
right? Because two things have to happen for you to have a successful project. A, you have to have a developer who has a project you want, or, you know, or uses that you want to be able to do. But more importantly, your town people are gonna vote on this. And some people are gonna listen to the facts, and I know enough about the history to know that some people may not want anything there. You know, it's gonna be up to the town people to vote on it, if I'm not mistaken, so information is power. And so that's important to make sure they vote for whatever ends up being there, but more importantly, for a developer, you wanna be in a position of strength, you wanna know your position of strength or relative weakness when you look at environmental conditions on a site. You kinda know what Scott is saying is true, you kinda know some of the stuff is going on, but if you have a phase one that says nothing's happened and nothing's changed since
then,
2020 or whatever the date was that
16.
happened, nothing's gotten worse and it's fine, then you know that going in, and I usually tell mayors and first selectmen, if you're going to negotiate on a piece of town property, if you have more information than the developer, that's to your advantage, versus they tell you what they think, you know, it's worth, or, you know, they try to do something they wanna do. So, information is power, I guess, is my overall statement for those two reasons, the developer and your voting public.
Keeping in mind that, like you said, there's a lot of different options, not the least of which is no development. It is important to understand what can and can't be done under particular circumstances. So depending on what you do with the property, depends on what degree of mitigation might be required, is what it comes down to.
well, you know what's interesting, I don't know if you know, and I've been sort of going to school, I've been going to the environmental school, the DEP, and they're in partnership with this grant, right? I was seeing on their website that this is from the DECD, but, you know, DECD, whatever, but it's also really in collaboration with the DEEP. And I've been going to, like, their tutorials, they're changing from the Transfer Act, right, and it's coming pretty close right now for implementation, to a release-based statutes. And to your point, Mika, there's two new scenarios that now are coming out. One of them is passive recreation, so there's
Right.
cleanup standards for release-based regulations. No longer, we're under the Transfer Act with this property, but, so there's passive recreational new standards and managed residential multifamily scenario. Managed meaning you have somebody that actually is out there performing the management services for that property. And so like raised beds, instead of growing in the ground, having raised beds. So I'm just saying is there are new standards that,
Yeah, you're gonna have the if there is a developer, you're gonna have consideration like permeable parking versus
Yeah.
asphalt. You know, permeable meaning rainwater goes straight through it, and any attenuation of conditions wherever they may be. Or they may just orient parking somewhere not near, because it's not all throughout the golf course, it's in certain areas. So, you know, they're gonna know what to do, and it also relates to where it is relative to utilities and things like that. You're gonna learn a lot as you go along. One question I have for the commission, and, you know, Scott and I have talked about it, is how can I help you from my vantage point? Because I do have a lot of background in environmental work, do have a lot of background in these planning things. You don't have to answer the question right now, but it's something, you know, that there has to be some facilitation in the managing of the grant itself. A lot of that will be internal, because you certainly have the people to do that. But think about how I can potentially help with the production of this FAR grant and working with Cooper Robinson just to keep things moving. Because they also have to kind of, you know, be the professional that comes in to say, here are the facts, everybody, versus here are the facts and here's what we'd like you to do. You know, you gotta keep them sort of in their role,
Right.
but not controlling things so much that somebody who's against anything is gonna
Right.
use that to their advantage.
The spirit of this master plan from the beginning has
Yeah.
been objectivity right? And that's really.
And that's what I
just-
heard at your Board of Selectmen.
Right.
And in keeping in mind also, we're at a point in my mind where the bar grant is, the only reason we're having conversations on it is because that's an area where it indicates we have to make sure, since we're using this money, we at least try to comply with what they're, how they're asking, or what they're suggesting we do, or how they suggest we go about it. But we're at a point in my mind where the next step for a advisory committee, whatever you want to call it, is something, that's part of the engagement with the consultant. So I'm almost at a point where we're past the grant part of this, in terms of, we've got to talk about the remediation, because that's part of the grant, and we have to just make sure that from a Cooper and Robertson standpoint, we meet those criteria.
Right.
But beyond that, at this point in time, what we're really looking at is, how are we going to engage with our consultant? And just to give you an update as to where we are, they sent us a letter, a letter of agreement, whatever you want to call it. And it was, as you might expect, their agreement. And we've had our attorneys look at it, and our attorneys came back and said, well, we really need to look at it from a town's perspective and make sure that the town's best interests are met. And so we're in contract negotiations. And I mean, there's been a lot of language change on this. So this could take a little while, is in my experience, because of that. It could, maybe what they see is something they've seen before, and it's not a problem at all, but it could take a little while. But that's where we are.
This is with Cooper's?
This is with Cooper Robertson. So I'm at a point where I feel just need to kind of keep an eye and understand that we were provided dollars, and there were criteria associated with what we do. I think we're in the process of meeting that criteria. And the only piece of it that I think we really need to move forward with is a committee to work on this project, which is part of the project as well. So I really think our focus and our dialogue at this point should be focused more on the Cooper Robertson engagement. And the remediation, things of that nature. Again, the remediation dollars associated with this grant are relatively small. And it is only phase one. It's, looking up the paperwork that says what's going on there.
Right.
It's a
As
box-
we
it's
move
a box
down-
you have to check, for sure.
Well,
Right,
as
exactly.
as a proportion of the total bar,
Mhm.
right, it's relatively small.
Yes.
The bulk of it is Cooper Robertson and
The
plan
bulk of it is planning.
Yeah.
The bulk of it is planning.
When the grant was submitted, don't forget, a lot of other documents were submitted along with the grant. Back up some of the documentation of the prior environmental work that was done. If they thought there was a big issue with the environmental, they would have said, what, are you kidding me? You only put in that small amount of money for the environmental aspect of this grant to basically do the phase one? Because they would have picked up on that immediately if they thought it was not accurate, or, not the correct approach. That's what they do. They do brownfield work.
Okay.
So Cooper's not on the clock yet?
They are not on the clock yet. We have not signed a document with Cooper yet. We are in contract negotiation.
But we do want to have this advisory committee question answered in advance of engaging with them.
There's no reason not to.
Right. I mean, I think that's the work we can do right now until we can bring them together, so.
I'll just add, Scott, I'm sorry
Yeah,
not to
that's
interrupt,
okay.
but I'll also add that we've reached out to them where I think we're at a point where we recognize we want to do business with one another. So we've reached out to them to talk about that, to say, okay, what's your view on what we should be doing here in terms of putting together? Now, EDC is going to play a pretty significant role in this, but the decision in terms of the committee and things of that nature can and likely will rest with the Board of Selectmen with input. And that's where EDC comes in, is with significant input. So it's also something to consider as well. So it's the right thing to do for this board this commission to consider what we should be doing and how we should be doing it for the purposes of advising the Board of Selectmen what your recommendations are.
And how we advise.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Does Cooper and Robertson know we're gonna have an advisory committee that's gonna interface with them?
Well, in interviews with Cooper Robertson, they were the ones who suggested, when we asked them what we would do and how we should do it, they were the ones who suggested that type of thing.
When I went
So
back.
virtually, honestly, Chatty, almost all of the consultants did. The only difference was, out of the last two, one of them suggested that we could work it with just the Board of Selectmen. I'm not in favor of that. I just want this to be more encompassing with different groups, with different people. But I do feel very strongly that the Board of Selectmen are the ones who will be responsible for making the decisions, so and they'll play a very, very strong role
So
in
they'll
this.
make the decision on the plan and also on the construction of the advisory committee.
The final decision, yes,
Dale,
On
could I
the
ask,
advisory committee,
yes,
structure of it, who's on it.
yes.
Okay.
could I ask you a question, Dale? In preparation for today, I looked at the bar grant, and I went through the Q&A process. And so I think it's important because I watched the first selectman meeting. It took 10 hours out of my life because I wanted to watch it twice. And it was 10 hours. So I did it over a couple of days.
Good to be retired.
Yeah. And be an attorney with no clients. So I read this question on the website, and I want to ask you the question because you're, our sort of guru on the bar grant, and we're seeing a 5-hour meeting, and it says, can the town's Board of Selectmen or an existing committee be the advisory steering / committee for the bar? And the answer on the Q&A is no. The Board of Selectmen or an existing cannot be considered for the advisory steering committee. Now, I'd like to talk to, I think there's lots of
And
problems.
where was this?
That's
written?
on the Q&A on the bar grant. So I think we've got to sort of get this roughed in because that's on the Q&A
The Q&A being from the state?
from the state DECD.
So,
So I think there's a lot of good reasons why that you want sort of a less formal, more informal committee to advise, is my thinking as to why. And I would have some reasons that I would love to, my thoughts on the reasons why a DECD would say that.
Yes, I
Because
understand.
you have the political machine gonna be making the decisions, people that have to answer to that. But, that's in the grant, so that's in the Q&A. And I wondered
Well,
your
but-
take on that.
Right, yeah. My opinion
Yeah,
is you gotta keep the politics out of this since it has such a long history. That's just my opinion. I read it as being that you're gonna have some sort of, and again, these are semantical terms, so you can change, get your thesaurus out and pick different words, but let's say you had a steering committee for just working with Cooper Robinson on the operational aspects of what they're doing, what are you doing, give us a presentation as an update, that kind of thing. And that would be comprised of town-related professionals, okay? Mika's office, obviously, Tony, members of this board, somebody from the recreation department, something like that.
Conservation.
Somebody that would be related to future decisions on process. But then have a broader advisory committee that would incorporate members of the Board of Selectmen, okay? Now, the words could be changed, one's steering, one's advisory, and I know it's getting kind of like bureaucratic here, but you're keeping the politics out, because if, generally speaking, you have five-hour meetings or whatever, but you want to basically, but they're the decision makers, they're the fiscal authority of the town for, let's say they were going to do something with remediation at some point, they're going to vote on it. So I think there needs to be some consideration of a broader unofficial group that would be maybe some citizens.
Right.
That just have a balance. That's why I was talking about facilitation before. Somebody's got to herd the cats, and deal with both the sort of mechanical piece, which is the steering committee, and the advisory committee would be a broader committee made up of members of, the broader community. Because in the grant, there's a lot of community engagement language in there. So it'd be not smart to not have people, the team of rivals, if you will, as part of this broader advisory committee. Because you want Mika, as a result, that something's gonna happen on this country club site.
Agreed.
right.
To get that, you need to engage people that you may disagree with in some ways.
And
And
what
that's the broader group.
And also to address what you mentioned, Scott, is during that during the dialogue that we had with At the Board of Selectmen. It was a long dialogue, not the full 5 hours, but, but it was a long dialogue. And by the end of the dialogue, I believe virtually every, and I'm not gonna hold myself to this, but I believe most, if not all, of the selectmen agreed that there should be a broader committee associated with the process related to the consultant. What was very strongly voiced was that they also felt the Board of Selectmen needed to maintain a very strong role in this. So in answer to the question, I don't think there's an issue with saying that the Board of, I think that question relates to, okay, the only folks who will be engaged in this process are the Board of Selectmen. And I don't think anybody, even on the Board of Selectmen, feels that that's necessary, that's the case. That's the way it's gonna be.
So I was trying to think, Dale, why does the Q&A, prohibit? And I came up with some of my thoughts and reasons that are why, they would think that you need that broader citizens group that's separate from, because I think you really run the risk if you bring the power people to the table. For public trust and transparency, I think you actually build more public trust if you don't have this thing dominated and stifled, because you bring 4 votes, 2 from the first selectman, and you bring 2 selectmen, you bring 4 out of the 6 votes to that table, and you have the citizens group. And, I think it's harder to have a freewheeling conversation when that conversation is going to be potentially dominated by that. It can be dominated in the proper form because the decision's going to be made at the political level with people that have campaign promises and things like that.
Yeah,
But what I'm saying is, I think what comes out of this is, and I think that's really important to the success of it, is we don't want to throw the baby out before we even pour the bath.
Right.
And I think, let alone the baby with the bathwater, I don't want to pour the baby out, before we even pour the bath. And that would be why I would think they would have
Yeah,
done
no,
that.
the way I
DCD.
thought about it is to have this 2 tiers, because you're gonna have a
Yeah.
daily functional thing with Cooper Robinson.
Right.
Monthly meetings, however it's gonna be.
Right.
And they've done the cost benefit analysis for this kind of use, or solar panels, or whatever it's gonna
Right.
be, and what's the progress on it, what's the next steps, and you're gonna go through this thing, and there's gonna be a recommendation at some point.
Right.
That's gonna go to the broader group, that would ultimately then go to the Board of Selectmen for decision-making purposes. It could be funding, financing, it could be negotiating with the developer, but 25 is an election year. You're in 24. The work's gonna come to fruition in 25. But the Board of Selectmen have to be part of the broader group, but they will also be mixed with, this is just my own common sense thinking, you can disagree. The broader group would be the Board of Selectmen mixed with the team of rivals, of people who have different opinions about what should be there and why it should be there. So when a vote comes and there's an effort to approve a project, it's not us versus them, or, one group versus another. You're always gonna get some of that, obviously. But I do think the broader group has to include the Board of Selectmen, but a non-daily functional role. And then they're part of the group with all the different advocates for different kinds of uses, and so they see different sides of it. So I've seen many a Board of Selectmen, I'm not saying Woodbridge, but, or town council or city council,
Right.
where they wanna be all involved, and it's a bad idea because of their own.
Right.
And if I could say, what Mika, your
Fiscal
comment
term.
about that the meeting was only an hour and a half, I appreciate that, and I think that makes a point, is that you guys have, there's either overlap because there was other conversations, there's a presentation about the country club from one of the conservation groups, and there's redundancy, and so I think, there's also bandwidth for the Board of Selectmen, and so I think it's really difficult for, putting, like Dale says, I think, you've got to sort of be participating in it and be there and know what's going on, but at the same time you've got a job to do in a 5-hour meeting, and you've got tons of stuff, LOTSIP's coming, and that's a huge community engagement, public engagement process, shutting down.
Lots of ARPA.
LOTSIP, you got stuff coming down, 1.3 of the ARPA is going to LOTSIP, and so you've got environmental planning down there. You've got lots of issues that are gonna distract you, and the country club may be a minor one now, and you're fighting about it now, but you've got this board of selectmen that's gonna, have multiple issues, and they gotta participate, but I don't think they're gonna stifle, fresh innovation, ideas.
So if I can jump in.
Yeah, please.
Right. I think we need to not debate the role of the Board of Selectmen in the advisory committee. That's not for us to decide, right? Because Mika just said that, like, ultimately the composition of the advisory committee is going to be the decision of the Board of Selectmen, right? So I think. if I heard-
With input.
With input, so our role is to come forward with a recommendation, right? Versus, I think getting, and
Yeah.
no offense, Scott, but like we're,
But I also feel that we have an obligation to participate and not be wanting to make a contribution. And comments were made that our town volunteers aren't very engaged, and that's just
Right.
not true. And we're very engaged, and fresh perspectives can come out of this. For instance, and I'm not advocating it for it, but you may find people that you put that don't have these sort of political pressures to run that committee. You may have fresh perspectives to come out. One of them might be that you could not do anything and have passive recreation up there, but recognize that SLR did the build-out in the POCD that says that the build-out analysis is that you'd be giving away a ton of development rights. So if you wanted to do passive recreation, what are you gonna do with those development rights, and where do they go? And so the part of the plan, when you reuse the country club, you also have to consider what other things should change if you use it in a particular way, because you have to consider the impacts of all the uses that you consider. And so you may want to do more development somewhere else. Or likewise, if it's passive recreation, you could say it's not. So there's lots of fresh perspectives
So-
that could come out of it.
right, but where are you going? So you're saying whether the Board of Selectmen should be involved at what level? I with all due respect, I don't know that that's our decision, okay? And like, let's focus if we can, because I know we all got opinions on it, right? Like, I go back to the bar narrative is sort of our touchstone on this, right? The objective and what we're trying to accomplish is, the best use for the country club, former country club, right? And we're being asked to provide input on the advisory committee and what that structure should look like, okay?
Right,
So
exactly.
within the confines of the bar, right, I'll just read this for everybody, right? It's defined as town staff in collaboration with the existing Economic Development Commission and assisted by representatives from the Board of Selectmen, Planning and Zoning, Housing, Conservation, 2030, CUPOP, and we want to add recreation to that, right? So I just counted off 7.
That is the advisory committee.
That's what I think we need to discuss tonight, right? So we've got, I don't know, in my mind, that could be like 15 individuals when you take all of that into account. So that's what's in the bar, right? And so the Board of Selectmen is included in there, right?
Right.
And I think what we need to come up with is, what is our recommendation,
Right.
our input, right? To go to the Board of Selectmen and say, here's how we think
Well, in
this
due
could
respect,
be.
that's what I'm trying to
Right.
give input into.
Right,
Okay.
okay. So I think the questions I have, Dale, is like, how do we best structure what, in my mind, could be like a 15-person
Wow.
advisory
We
committee?
definitely need something smaller for the day-to-day stuff. Call it a working committee, call it whatever you want,
Okay,
which would be town staff, just to deal with Cooper, like on a day-to-day level, what they're doing. Because to
Mhm.
try to get 15 people to come to a meeting once a month with all the other obligations, that's gonna be a problem.
mhm.
But, so there needs to be something smaller that's just the professionals in the town hall to
Okay.
deal with Cooper. So, but, I guess, Mika, is sort of a question, if the Board of Selectmen are to be, and I read the same thing that Scott read, you're not gonna want all of the Board of Selectmen on, you would want 2 members of each party, you know,
No,
one
so
member of each
there's only
party.
six members of the Board of
Only six, yeah, I was
Selectmen.
gonna say.
So we were, I would be attending as staff as well as a
Right, but
member
they
of the
need to
board.
understand that, you know, this is a bigger group. I think that I think part of it is, Scott, is there needs to be like a communication about what this is, advisory, what their role is. It's not to, it's basically to hear what's going on. Ultimately, somebody's have to vote on something to send it to a referendum or whatever it's gonna be to the voters. But who leads this advisory committee is a rhetorical question. Who's the leader of it?
Right.
Who's gonna say, we're gonna have an advisory group committee?
What
Yeah.
what I presented to the board was that based on what I read and based on what I see and based on what I'd like to see, is I'd like EDC to play the role in terms of what you said, herding the cats, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, for organizing and identifying and process, and making sure the process
And that's what was
works.
presented at the meeting?
So, and it wasn't determined, but this was a dialogue. We had the dialogue, we didn't make any
So
motion.
that's
we didn't make-
the day-to-day sort of.
So, well, yes, if you're arranging for meetings and who's gonna be, you know,
Right.
who can or who cannot, what's the topic, what's the agenda, things of that nature. So, and I do feel that this is an area where, I'd like to see EDC play a very strong role in. But I'd like you to be very close to what's going on in terms of this, because I think it's going to enable or position the EDC to do more than we've been able to do in the past.
Right.
So just to sort of, you look at it from a practical perspective, when Cooper Robinson has done, 40% of the work and they want to present their findings, they would potentially present it to the EDC.
They would be working,
And-
no, they would present it to the committee as a
The
whole.
broader group.
You know, and it's almost, Dale, it's like most things, in my mind, most engagements that I've been a part of, it's a process, so you kind of know what's going. When the presentation really gets, the presentation, if you will, is put together by the group. And so nobody's out of the loop in terms of what's being, what the deliverable will be. However, at the end, there is a group that makes the decision, who the presentation is provided to, so that, with all the input, so that a decision can
So
be
it's
made.
sort of sponsored by the EDC, but.
Sponsored is a good word, I
Right.
think, from that
Right.
perspective.
They
That
might
might be a
attend
better
the meeting
word.
and say what they're doing, what
Mhm.
they're up to in preparation of a
See,
presentation.
by doing it that way, I think, in addition to being acutely engaged, the market analysis on this is probably what's most important from my perspective. Just the data, to truly understand the benefits and the drawbacks of any kind of solution and all solutions. So the more information we have, I think by being close to the process, you will understand what we should be going after. How much is housing a part of economic growth? How much is passive recreation? How much does that bring in? How much, it's like, it gives you, I think, the ability to identify what priorities you want to go after as a result of the data that's being collected on this very, very important piece of property. So that's the reason I feel the way that I do.
Right,
It hasn't been voted on by the board.
I get it. So, Scott, for, your question was, in terms of this board making a recommendation for the advisory committee. We'll call it advisory committee.
Please.
That's what you want to come out of here,
Right,
right?
I think we got that, right?
Yeah.
Former country club and
And
advisory.
advisory.
Right, so do you want the board to make a recommendation to go to the Board of Selectmen, and then they would be invited, whoever is listed? But you need recreation people, because that's definitely gonna come up.
Right,
You need a housing kind of representative, you need, your professional staff on the advisory, your Board of Selectmen, I think we've established that, to be offered to be on it, but wouldn't they have to accept being on it versus, you can't just show up now and then.
Right.
You're on it.
Right.
Right.
They're on it.
Yeah, if I could jump in there, I think there has to be some sort of buy-in from the participants, like I pledge not to be intransigent. In other words, unwilling to compromise. I pledge to want to work towards a solution. I pledge, and Mika, to your point, it's not just approve or deny, it's modify. And so I think if you have a good advising committee that looks and these things, I think the Board of Selectmen not only just approve something like, okay, and then we're gonna throw it out, they can approve it with modification. And that modification can be the compromise that they politically see. And a
then
good
they-
steering
and then
committee will put that in front of the power makers and say, you know, I'm gonna approve that with
Because
this
they've witnessed the process and they've been
That's
part
right,
of the process.
and they're gonna, I'm gonna approve this with this modification, that you know, I think of a scenario that makes somebody happy, and, but we're gonna do this over here, or something like that, because, you know, property is fungible for the town, and zoning, you're making zone recommendation changes, all that stuff's in play. And so, I think a Board of Selectmen is not like, well, here's the plan, and either you accept it or not. And that's the risk you run when you put the votes, the political party on the steering, because it's sort of a done deal and it stifles the flexibility. Now, that's my view on that, that's my 2 cents. You're better off having them watch it without a quorum running the thing and stifling it and saying, okay, I'm gonna now approve this and I'm gonna tweak it or maybe major adjust it, depending upon who's, you know, in play.
Okay, so then, Scott, what you're advocating is that they don't have a role in the advisory committee?
Yeah, that's absolutely not. That's
Oh, okay.
that's stating a position that, of course, you need the Board of Selectmen there, but the question is, do you want a quorum? Do you want 4 votes out of the 6 there?
There was, Scott, just to clarify on
Yeah.
that, in the entire conversation, the intent was to not have a quorum, so.
But let's talk about it, because if you're gonna make it a Republican and a Democrat, and you're gonna bring in a selectman with 2 votes,
The selectman only has 2
they
votes.
can make the decision. So when
The
I'm
selectman
sitting,
has the 2
But
votes
wouldn't
as
the
relates
idea
to the Board of
wouldn't the
Selectmen.
idea be that they're not gonna vote on anything? They're
Right.
gonna get the information from Cooper Robinson. There's gonna be a
Advise.
recommendation from the professional, Cooper Robinson.
right,
Because that's what you hired him for, in part, a master planner.
right.
And that, unless there's something crazy that, you know, that's very controversial, the vote will be the public. The vote's gonna be this, the town needs to invest X dollars, and that's the vote, it seems to me, that your taxpayers are gonna vote on the thing. But Cooper
referendum.
Robinson tells you that's why you hired him, to do a master plan.
Right.
Am I wrong about it?
With the approval for what would go to the public.
There's gonna have to be
lies
some,
with the Board of
there's gonna have to
Selectmen
be
and
some,
DPC.
like, yeah, are you good with this kind of thing, but
Right.
not like a meeting, like planning and zoning, or something like that.
Okay,
Are you hearing
Chatty,
that
you-
right,
you
Mika?
had
'Cause it's- yeah.
a question or comment?
I'm not exactly sure where everything's going, but we all agree on that there's going to be an advisory committee.
Yes.
That's
Question.
in the grant, absolutely.
We can
Now-
agree here,
Yes.
and what that looks like, we're still in conversation at the
Yep.
Board of Selectmen level.
So, we have an advisory committee. Do we agree that the advisory committee is gonna consist of various members of town organizations, commissions, whatever it is?
That's what I've introduced, that's what I'd like to see.
And that's what's in the grant.
Okay, so now the next question is, what are all of the different commissions and organizations within the town that could potentially be on this committee, on this
Right.
advisory?
The ones that were specifically mentioned
Right.
were.
Board of Selectmen, TPZ, Housing, Conservation, 2030, CUPOP, and Recreation would be added to that as well.
And those are the only, first question is, those are all the commissions that we have?
No, not by,
But the
not by a
relevant
long
ones.
stretch. Those
Okay.
are the ones that we feel would have a vested interest in a direct invested interest in what happens on the property.
Would it
And
make
That's not
sense,
to say the others. that
And that's
would it
in
make
it.
sense to have like a fire marshal or somebody on it that, you know, that has some sort of public safety aspect?
We can bring resources in as is necessary, as any committee would. So these are the folks that would make up the discussion body, if you will.
And is there, and I'm sorry, Scott, I may have to ask you to repeat that, other parts of the paid group of folks that work for the town?
Right.
Are they part of that?
They're
Yes.
included in there.
So-
Staff is included, as is EDC.
Right, so the way that it was written, right, is that the town staff, right, which Mika, you and I talked about, what that would look like, the zoning enforcement officer, Tony, Karen,
And myself.
and yourself, right?
Is that 4 people?
Yeah.
You just mentioned, okay.
Then there would be EDC representation, which we'd have to determine, right? That's in addition to all the other boards and commissions that I just mentioned,
Okay.
which is why I'm saying it gets to be.
Yeah, it's
So
been,
the
yeah.
4 people that you just mentioned, and then the other commissions and rec, how many people does that total if it's 1 person per commission? I'm just making an assumption that's 1 person per commission.
It becomes like probably 12, I think, if I totaled it up. So 4 and 8, right, Rick? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, look at me for the.
And Mika, I think I'll ask you this
It's about
because you're kind of used to
Your number 15
working in
was
these
sounded
groups
about
for
right.
the town that are a little bit larger. Here it's just, 8 of us or whatever it is. Do we hit a point where there's too many?
Yes.
Do we know what that point is?
No, we would, not necessarily, I said probably the better answer. That is why, as I say, one of the things we would do is we would consult with the consultant who does this for, has the expertise, has done this with numerous other organizations, to identify what the best is. This is a discussion to determine what we can do. We're in negotiation, we expect that we're gonna be in negotiation. Rather than wait until we sign a contract and then start the process, we're trying to run in parallel to see if we can move things along a little quicker. So in answer to your question, we would look to identify. I mean, I have a sense from my experience, my personal experience, and working corporately and working other places, at what point in time you get kind of a diminishing return in terms of having too many people. But, and I also have experience with knowing that there are very large projects where if you don't, that's a concern as well. So is 12 reaching that point? Yes. 12 is reaching a point where you're saying, okay, the meetings themselves could be, just kind of thwart the process.
So we should then look to Cooper Robertson to provide that recommendation.
I think their experience, their exposure, folks like Scrog, folks like, other resources that we have available to us will very much weigh in on that type of thing from my perspective.
Okay.
The other thing I'll say, only because I'm kind of feeling this, we need to understand this is something we want to get done.
Mhm.
We don't know what it is necessarily that we want to do, but we want to get to the end of a process. And if we're having a significant challenge in starting the process, that's an indication that, to me, that's an indication that we need to relook things and try to understand what we need to do in order to make sure that this works. So, as I said before, I'm confident and I feel sure that the Board of Selectmen will want and should identify what the ultimate committee looks like. I will tell you also, I feel strongly that Board of Selectmen representation should be on that committee. So, and it's again, representation. I think that's essential. And I think taking the board out of that picture just.
Mika, I just want to make sure I'm not being clear. You make it sound like I'm advocating for no representation of the Board of Selectmen.
That's what I heard you say.
What I'm saying, let me be
Yeah,
clear,
please.
because you're saying, and Scott as
surprises
well.
me.
And because it really surprises me that you're interpreting it as such that I'm saying I don't want the Board of Selectmen to represent. They're the elected people, right? They have their, pre-existing constituents that they have to apply to. They have all that, right? They got to be involved, right? But I want to come up with a good steering committee. And yes, you need their representation. But to say that I want an R, I want a D, I want 4 votes, we can debate whether that's going to stifle it, whether it's a covered proceeding, and let alone not a quorum, but a covered proceeding. All I'm suggesting is that you're saying that I don't want Board of Selectmen representation
I'm sorry.
on an advisory committee. I want them to, you discussed it for hours in multiple sessions about the country club. And we are here 10 years down the road trying to be an efficient process that seeks out non-political, open and transparent, right? Open and transparent ideas from an advising committee. And there may be some really good ones, but we're not allowed to engage because the political structure's got it. And that's why I think DEEP and DECD said the Board of Selectmen can't be the advising committee. Now, I might be wrong, and you can go back. But, so, please don't say that I don't want their involvement.
We're past that, Scott. So
But
with
also,
regard-
I'm
Well-
sorry, just to clarify, And
Yeah.
I misunderstood, because I thought you said very specifically, you felt that there should not be Board of Selectmen representation.
Oh, absolutely not.
So,
Not a
okay,
quorum.
then I
I don't
just
think you want to
misunderstood.
turn it into a quorum of the Board of Selectmen. A covered proceeding or 4 votes, which could be deemed to be a quorum.
Nor do
You can
I.
check with your counsel on that, but I just don't think you want to turn it into a public meeting and have an agenda from the Board of Selectmen.
One of the reasons for the long conversation with the Board of Selectmen was because of that. So, yeah, I understand and I appreciate
Well,
that.
but,
just
yeah, but I want
misunderstood.
representation from the Board of Selectmen.
Understood.
Is
Thank
this-
you.
Is the steering committee gonna operate as a town committee?
Yes.
So
In the
they're gonna
sense,
have-
in the in similar sense to the building committees and,
So they'll
The
have
other
meetings
committees we
like
have.
this, they'll have recorded meetings, everything they have to discuss in the meeting, they can't discuss things outside, they'll have to operate like we are.
Would it be an
Dale,
ad
could you
hoc?
weigh in on that a little?
This is,
What we're saying is this, have you seen advisory committees, full Monty, FOIA, subcommittees, a public agency? You know, there's sort of public agencies that have FOIA, recorded minutes the next day within 24 hours. Do you see the advising committee to seek out fresh ideas being effective that way? Mika says it's gonna be a public agency. Shadi was asking the question, what do you see in effective advisory committees? Are they really public agencies?
I've seen it both ways,
Yeah.
informal and formal, and I think
Yep.
in this case, it needs to be formal.
Okay.
And
That's
why
my
is
opinion,
that?
because then it's transparent, and there's no mystery to it, and people can see it, and then later when people are voting on it, I go to, what do you want out of this? You want a project.
Right.
Anything that creates mystery creates a problem.
No, we need transparency.
So my answer is,
100%.
it should be that way in this case. I've seen other, informal things on various topics where you have to form, now, I don't know from a charter perspective if you need to do anything formally, if you're gonna do it that way. I'm not a lawyer, but, it'd be worth a question.
if
You're
we
gonna do-
set up a committee.
Because there
about-
must be an ad hoc thing in your charter that allows you to do that, but my answer, Scott, is yes, it should be that way.
So if we do take a formal path, is it best that, like what you guys were talking about, the Board of Selectmen representation is a non-voting member of that board, of that commission?
No, if the Board of Selectmen members were part of it, it would be structured so that they are part of it.
Okay.
So they would
think-
function like any other member of the committee.
Voting is a whole nother.
Right, the
Right,
whole,
because-
so
but
the
just
whole
there
voting
are-
topic.
There are
I get it, yeah.
logistical questions for your town attorney. So if you have a union employee on this
Right.
committee, are you is there some issue with the union for them to be going to a meeting overtime? The couple questions should be run down a little bit.
Employee-wise, it's limited to the staff, which we mentioned, Tony, myself.
All right, so
Karen.
there's no union, yeah, so I'm only bringing up things.
Yeah, I understand. I
It's
appreciate
just
it.
popping into my head, somebody's a town employee and they're on a commission. Is there anything that prohibits a town employee from being on a commission
In some cases.
if they don't live in town? Or, there's something, in my mind, there's these little triggers that you just need to run this down, to make sure if you're gonna put it together. But overall, I think there should be. Given the history of this thing, yes.
That'll slow things down.
Yeah, but it'll also create a potential end result at the end.
Understood.
Cliff,
We-
you had-
yeah.
I did. To that point about processing, the process to establish that committee, you would be doing this, taking the input from EDC, from each other organization that you're talking to, and going back to the Board of Selectmen, coming up with the final group, if you will. In that committee, what type of a timeline are you looking at? Based on what you said, you're in negotiations with Cooper, with their timeline that was proposed, week 1 of project kickoff, week 2 analysis discovery, when are these two groups gonna start to mesh?
Very, very soon after, we would expect to have that. That's one of the reasons, as I said, we're working on this now, is so we're ready when the time comes to
Okay.
do the kickoff.
Okay.
If you wanted a timeline, I don't see it necessarily being completely settled by the September meeting, which is 3 weeks away, less than 3 weeks away, but I do see it completely being settled by the October.
In terms of the purpose of the group, besides, coming to a conclusion on the final use of the country club and being part of the process of telling the story to the taxpayers, because they're gonna vote on it, don't forget, there's then another process, I'm talking about the life of the committee and where the legs, how deep the legs go. So ultimately, there's gonna be a, you know, working with Cooper Robinson, a master plan, cause that's their job. Then you're gonna go for developers, potentially.
Yeah.
Then there's gonna be the process of building whatever needs to be built.
Right.
There's gonna be the possible, potential of town involvement at the end if some of it remains public space. So this committee has a longer term mission than you probably realize, is the way I'm thinking about it.
Dale, if I could say that one of the things I read on the website and was in the, you know, in the application is that, to Dale's point, the longer life of this than a 2-year, you know, a political term, is that you're gonna have to come up with what you wanna do, the town wants to do with the property. Once they determine that, you're gonna wanna start to involve those partners from the private sector, right? The investors, you know, we, if you will, for instance, whatever you choose, you're gonna have to start to figure out who are gonna be able to implement that plan for you. I wanna build a biotech center. Well, who's the partner that's gonna build you a biotech center? I wanna build a nature center and recreation center. Well, who's gonna build that for you? You know, and you may be looking at that, you know, I want
Yeah.
Disney World to come in. I wanna partner with Disney. I wanna start adding Disney to the thing. Or, so what I'm saying is, that life is also, that's part of this
Yes,
advising
yeah,
committee, is
the
to
people who
seek
join this
people
have
that
to
can
understand
bring
that.
those people to the table, not necessarily,
Because without the continuity of the committee
Yep.
to go through the lifespan of what's gonna, and when you walk away and it's all done and whatever's gonna be there, it's gonna be between now and 8 years. Or something like that, you know? And then when you go for the partners, then there's gonna be a procurement process for that. And what's the best deal for the town? So but the commitment of being on this is not just for Cooper Robinson's master plan suggestion. To me, it's a longer term thing, so when you pick the committee, however it comes out to be, the participants should really buy into that, because, you know, not everybody's gonna stay the entire time, I get it. But I do think that without doing that, things are gonna get lost along the way.
Scott,
Working on a lot of brownfield projects, you know,
Mhm.
there's a long span of time from the vision to the.
and a lot of history that
Okay.
gets you to where, and so there's gonna be people that know the history for the 8 years.
You have to have, you can't have too much attrition off the group.
Right.
Scott, if I could, I'd like to pick up on what Cliff was asking and maybe put this to you. Are there things that we can, actionable items within the next 30 days that we can work on? Obviously, there's a lot of things we need to talk about.
Right.
Do you have in mind actionable items for us to sort out over the course of the next 30 days?
Right. So with regards to the advisory committee,
Yes.
right? So this understanding that the Board of Selectmen is ultimately going to drive the composition and the structure of the advisory, this is like brand new. So, and I'm not opposed to it, okay? I really thought coming into tonight that we were going to discuss, like, how are we going to structure it, okay?
Okay.
So, in terms of how we proceed coming out of here, what I'm hearing from all of this is that the Board of Selectmen wants a recommendation from the EDC on the structure.
Why can't we accomplish that right now?
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, that was the intention.
So I
Right.
like the idea of including conservation, COOPOP, EDC,
Right,
recreation. I'm missing some of
What's in
them.
the grant, looks exactly right.
Yeah,
right.
that's part of
Plus
it.
a couple.
And is the questionable stuff the town employees and the
No,
For
the staff is
selectmen?
assigned. The staff is assigned.
is assigned?
Right.
So is the question just the first selectman representation?
I think there's the question in my mind is the EDC and town staff portion of this and other boards and commissions, right? How is that structured? What is their different levels of involvement? How do we maintain this so that it is an objective look at what do we do with the country club, okay? And and so you have, what Dale's laying out is you need to have a smaller group, I guess, that is,
Well, that
more
that
in
was
the
just my
day-to-day.
thinking, but what Mika, I heard Mika saying is he wants this to be the smaller group. Or the day-to-day stuff. with
No,
Cooper.
I
The
didn't.
day-to-day
I-
stuff is usually done by the staff. In other
Yeah.
words,
Right.
they're the ones who are working during, that's what we're paid for.
Right,
That's-
right.
You know, that's why we're
Right.
paid.
Yeah.
So from a day-to-day standpoint, it'll be the staff working. Like if the EDC wants to set up a meeting, you're gonna call the staff. We're the ones who, on a date, so we're gonna take that and we're gonna work with it.
Right.
We're, you know, that type of thing there. So if Cooper Robertson has some questions that they need to get out to certain people, that we're gonna be the ones who coordinate that.
Okay.
So, you know, again, from a day-to-day standpoint, that's part of what we do. In the reason I'm looking for the EDC to help is because it's me, it's Tony, it's Karen.
Right.
You know, and Allison obviously helps, and Tony Belinsky obviously helps. So from that perspective, and we're all engaged, like the point that Scott made, there's a lot of other things we're engaged in. So it would be difficult for us to just completely manage this process on our own, and I think it behooves us and you for the EDC to play that role for us.
I agree with Mika. I think the EDC member should be the belly button for this advisory committee.
How
I think
many?
if you pick somebody from one of the other commissions, they may be a little bit leaning more towards what they want.
right, and that's how it's structured, right? So,
you're-
but, go ahead, Dale.
No, I was just thinking, if I'm on a planning and zoning commission, hypothetically, and I'm asked to be on this, you might get some reticence from other commissions, because they're gonna have to vote on something a potential developer is gonna be presenting to them as a result of this process. So be prepared for that, because I've been involved, trying to put together groups with other EDCs, and when you go to planning and zoning, you get people that wanna be on it. You might get people that say, no, I'm gonna have to vote on something. I wanna see the objective proposal from the developer, if it was a development. And I don't wanna my vote to be compromised because I was on the steering committee or something like that. Just food for thought. These are just things that popped into my head. So you'll have a group, a recommended group that the Board of Selectmen will approve, but you be prepared for some people not to wanna be on it. There is that possibility.
Okay. My recommendation is that we take a group of the EDC and the town staff, right?
And I'm sorry, Scott, just to interrupt, I keep neglecting this, Chris Sullivan is part of the town staff.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, you had mentioned Chris, Karen, Tony, and yourself,
Yep.
right? So then there would be a group of us, okay, that would be a part of that, and then I think I would recommend that we engage with Cooper Robertson on what does, knowing that these other boards and commissions will be part of it, right? But they're going to have a whole process of stages and gates and everything to this, that's where, I think once we see that, then we can define who comes in where, at what point, and what's the regular cadence. Okay, so do we need to bring 15 people together every other week? It's never gonna happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So that's the kind of thing, not being able, I've been able to look at a scope of work and a project plan from June of 2023, right? Which is, so,
Yeah, to your point, and I agree. It's kind of preliminary because I think, as I said, Cooper Robertson and others may play a big part in what we do and how we structure it and think, how many people, that type of thing there. But I do feel it's important to understand. I think what we can decide, like here, is like what Chatty suggested. Do we think this is, like the folks who were mentioned, do we think that's, and now the next question becomes, well, who else?
right.
Like, do we feel the public should be represented on this committee? Or is that a public engagement type of scenario where we just do that through public engagement, which is obviously going to be part of the process, a big part of the process?
Right.
Do we want resources, like Scott mentioned, some heavy hitters in regards to New Haven, which is right next door? Do we want resources with that kind of clout to also input on this? Do we bring them in as subject matter experts, or do we bring them in at different times? What I'm looking for you know, from my perspective, what I would expect to come out of today is, yes, we feel like this, what's here is what we would like to see. Or we
Okay.
feel strongly that we want something that's not here, and this is what it is, so that it's presented.
I think it's simple, then we can maybe take a vote right here, you know, or is anyone opposed to, as written in the bar grant? And that is our recommendation to,
And adding recreation.
and adding
And
recreation
yeah, it's not
to
a.
the board of selectmen.
But not having not having 3 selectmen on the committee.
But
You
we're
can,
still
no, if
talking
that's
general
that's up to you guys. I'm not
No,
gonna.
I'm saying, but as a recommendation, do you want 3 board of selectmen? I feel that there's a real, making it political, I think
runs a real risk.
I
In-
agree, I agree with Scott, I'm sorry.
And I'm not trying to, I mean, you know, I'm a lawyer that has no client. I don't have a developer client. I'm a lawyer that has no bringing anything to the table. I don't have a client. I don't have a developer as a client. I don't have and so, you know, I think you need that kind of lack of political pressure and in that, because they can take a plan that everybody's trying to bring fresh ideas to come up with a plan with the consultants and transparency. This is not steering like they're calling the shots. There's transparency all through the process with the consultant, right? There's transparency in the steering committee as well.
So
Does-
if you took the list, Scott,
Yeah.
how many people is that right there? Just 2 members of this group, and everybody's in the bar?
Well, that
There's gotta
was
be
the-
like 9.
When
You can
oh,
call me Hunter, by the way, because I think when you call Scott, you don't know how
sorry,
to
sorry.
attribute it, and Tony, you're probably having a
I'm getting
heck
pretty
of a
good at
time.
it, though.
Yeah,
I'm
but-
able to pick up.
Well,
the-
yeah, it's
Talking about
becoming
you,
political.
not me. Yeah.
Chairman,
Chairman, and or you can call me Hunter.
I'd like to just verify who it is that we're talking about. And this is from your email. Board of Selectmen, TPZ, Housing, Conservation, 2030, CUPOP, and
Recreation.
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 Right.
So one member of each.
Yeah.
So that.
one member.
One
Two,
member.
3, 4, 5, 6, would be 6 different commissions. Or task force, 2030 is task force, plus EDC. So outside of the EDC, there's 6.
And the town staff.
Right, I'm just
There's
saying,
7.
so, right, and then there's a question about,
I think there's 7
and then
members.
there's 4 from the town staff.
Town staff, which includes Mika.
Correct.
So is
Right, you're
Mika
not-
is Mika the voting
you're
member?
not the selectmen that they're talking about.
I'm not the selectman that you would be talking about. And I also, just to make sure everybody understands, I am looking
So,
for,
Mika, would you,
beside myself, 2 other
would
selectmen.
you say this is sort of like bring it home here, that the board of selectmen is on the committee, but the commission, I'm not putting words in your mouth, Mr. Chairman, recommends 2, or, 2 selectmen or
if that's
something-
what EDC
something
is
at least to
recommending.
talk about
Okay.
versus,
One in the staff category and one in the board of
that's
selectmen
up to,
category.
that's up to you guys. I think Mika's staff in this case, personally.
Right. So I think what we're having, we should call a vote, is around, in the non-staff capacity, how many members of the board of selectmen should be on the advisory committee,
I'll make an analogy.
right? Okay.
When I used to run an incentive program, I did it for 21 years.
Mhm.
160 something incentive packages were approved, 163 of them. And on the committee was a big conversation about who should be on the committee. We brought in staff, we had the tax collector, the tax assessor. That would be like the antithesis to them, giving away taxes to a business. But the mayor at the time, this was 1999, put them on the committee on purpose to make them part of the solution. But in that were 1 Democrat and 1 Republican. Because that town was, it was as political as every other town. And they called it out because they wanted to make sure it wasn't overloaded one way or the other. And that was in a town that was dominated by Democrats. I'm talking out of 15 people, like 11 or 12 were always Democrats. But they wanted to make sure that there was representation. I'm not sure that flies here, but they did, have it, a specific recommendation from the EDC, by the way, to have it that way. And ultimately, the council did vote for that. they were okay. I'm just saying that, you know,
I think, Mika, correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't want to put words, and I've only started to be engaged in the town in the last
And it was
few
successful,
years,
by the
but I think this town takes a position that if you have a functional equivalent of a public agency, that you need the minority party representation.
That is correct.
And so the question is, would this be, and for town council, would this actually rise to the level? I'm not saying it shouldn't be transparent and formal, but would it rise to the level of a public agency? You know, would it or functional equivalent? I think there's a strong argument it's not a functional equivalent, and we can have all the trappings of FOIA without FOIA being involved. So, but that would be a question for the political, you know, the town council or something in that regard.
I'll take that as an action item, Scott, to see what I can, you know, to see if we can get a definitive answer.
Because there are four elements to establishing whether it's a functional equivalent of a public agency. I'm not suggesting in any way you don't want transparent government, but you gotta balance it against the goal of not stifling, you know, FOIA can be used also as a sword, you know, to stop things. But at the same time, I'm not saying you don't want transparency, and there's robust transparency in the public participation. And so it really is, would this be a functional equivalent of a public agency? And I think there are four elements to understanding that, and those squarely, I think, don't fall within it having to be deemed to be a functional equivalent of a public agency. That's not to say you don't want to have a film and film at 11 and do your best, but you don't want to be called to task because I'm missing somebody that wants to get something done because they're not in the right party, or they, you know, and you just bog it down in the political machine of it. So I really want this to work. This is the good stuff.
Right.
The politics is, I'm not intransigent. Politicians can tend to be intransigent. I looked that one up.
I wanna see Tony's notes on it.
Spell that one and I looked that one up.
Cliff, what's
I'm in full agreement with what we're saying with the group that would be comprising this. A question perhaps for you to look into would be the timeline that Cooper is providing, 16 plus weeks, right?
I think it was 22 in total, right? Get to the-
So,
Yeah.
regardless of that, call it 16, 24, doesn't matter. Is the composition of this committee going to be affected by the end of someone's appointment, right? So some appointments are up in 2025. Is this going to be their position, if you will, on this committee? Is it going to be based on their position within another commission or committee? And if their appointment expires, are they out and you have to appoint someone else? So granted, it's, in the grand scheme of things, we know where we're going with this, but these are little things that could pop up and say, well, is this gonna derail the way that this committee is going to be
That's why I asked
steering
about
and
the
or
char-
advising?
The charter implications, just to make sure it's sort of what you're
Mhm.
saying, that is there are there other words you need to use besides, you can't call it a commission, because then
Right.
you'll have a conflict.
Mhm.
People can't serve on more than one commission, things like that.
Right.
is what you're talking about.
You know, and if I can also piggyback, I think it's a great question, Cliff, and I think it begs an answer. But also, I think we're gonna hear that as another thing that the Board of Selectmen are gonna deal with, is that you have the largest grant the town of Woodbridge has ever got a commitment to fund, and the LOTSIP. And that's just the start of it, because you've got a placemaking zoning changes that go on top of that, and public engagement. And so that's a process that's gonna go well beyond a commission kind of a thing. And we have a chance to be leaders and set the tone for getting things moving forward, because that LOTSIP one is a big one, and we'll come up to think about how to address that. But there could be some relevant things we learn from this if we want to get stuff done, because that's $8 million for sidewalks. What does that mean the placemaking is going to look like, and how do you set up that kind of public engagement and people that are going to deal with the zoning issues to make that
So,
placemaking?
I just want to make sure, so Cliff, your concern is we'll have some folks that will term out and.
Potentially.
Right.
And how
Before
the
the-
organization of this committee, this
Right.
advisory committee, steering committee, would be comprised and or then kind of backfilled. That's something for for you all
My
at
vote
the
is-
BOS.
My vote would be it's project-based. That's why it's not a functional equivalent of a public agency. We're funded not by the town. We're funded by a grant from the DECD and DEP in collaboration. So we are not a functional equivalent. And so I would think we're there till we produce the work product. If you read the narrative, we have a deliverable, and that is a plan that we put in front of the Board of Selectmen, and they can approve it or modify it or reject it. But chances are, they're probably, I don't know, maybe we just have all the decision makers when we submit the plan, and then it's gonna be just a slam dunk because there's no need to go. But I'm thinking they might maybe wanna modify it. The town,
Okay.
you know, but, so I would argue that this is not a functional equivalent, and your duration is you sign on to be intransigent, and you sign on for the life of the grant, which is not that long, but you may want them to stay on if we are able to get partners to do the remediation. And the remediation, depending upon what you do, has different levels. Passive recreation is gonna be a different standard than, you know, managed multifamily. So you're gonna have different standards there when that comes out. So the length of this project could be short or long, but I think they should sign on for all of it. That's my vote.
So it wouldn't have anything to do with the term.
It's not-
I don't think it's a public agency.
Gotcha.
I don't-
Okay.
So I think that's what needs to be determined, right?
And that's something that I'll take up with legal. Additionally, we are 16 months away from, if I'm not mistaken, it's November of '25. So we're about 15 months away from an election.
And
where they change the term.
campaigning starts now.
Campaigning doesn't change terms. So what we're talking about as far as terms is changing, we're talking about a 6-month process here. So I think there's enough buffer there so that that particular issue is not an issue that we should use a lot of time for.
Okay.
Additionally, if there's change for whatever reasons, people decide that they can't do it, people move out of the town, people,
Right.
whatever the case may be, we have that in every committee and commission. And we deal with it the way we've always dealt with it. We replace if we need to replace, or we make an assessment and determine what we need going forward. What I hope we can do is identify the process by which our public feels we are being as transparent as we possibly can be.
Right.
And we have the resources available to the process that are willing and able. And what Scott said earlier is very important to me. We don't want folks who are predisposed to a particular solution. We want people who might feel like they want a solution, but are open to listening to everything else that's being said. And that's what we need to go toward. But, you know, I don't think we should be putting hurdles in front of the process before the process has even started. All we're trying to do here is, okay, how do we best structure what we need to do to be successful? I'm starting to understand why things haven't been done so far.
But Mika, well, let me also make one analogy, is that there was, in the bar grant application, right, or the narrative, it looks like the design, Dale, was to have one representative from TPZ. This would be like TPZ, so for instance, let's say we make a recommendation, the advisory committee makes a recommendation that requires a zoning change. And let's just take something that says, we want to make this passive recreation, and it's gonna be, and we need to change the zone to a forest, or to whatever you would do to make it passive recreation. You can't build houses on it, it's just a passive recreation, we need a zone change, because that's zoned up there currently for something, we need to make it passive recreation zone change. That doesn't go to the Board of Selectmen for approval, the approval deciding point of that is the TPZ. So this would be like asking to have 3 TPZ members on this steering committee. I think, and I shouldn't put words in a TPZ's mouth, but what they'll say is, you're gonna bring the application to me. And I'm either gonna say, I'm changing it, or I'm gonna modify it. Because, you know, you're gonna have to bring that to TPZ if your recommendation in the plan, is, you know, I'm intransigent, it's not my plan. And so you're gonna have to go to TP&Z and the Board of Selectmen, because you're gonna have to go, you know, for a zoning change. If you got this plan, and it's likely there's gonna be a zoning change that's gonna come out of that, likely. But maybe not. Maybe it's all gonna be, that's single-family zoning, that's single-family housing up there, 2 acres, right? So maybe it doesn't. Maybe you build houses on 2 acres. Maybe that's the plan. But likely, you're probably gonna have a zoning change.
Well, no matter who's on the steering committee, everybody's gonna feel at some point there's some conflict that they're gonna have.
Yeah.
You know, in what they might have to deal with in the future. Maybe perhaps Board of Selectmen representatives are gonna say, okay, I may not agree with it, but, you know, all the people on this committee, including whoever else we want on it, we ought to let the people vote. That's the name of the book, by the way, Let the People Vote, Teddy Roosevelt.
I thought we were headed,
Start a primary system.
toward a proposal.
Me too.
Are we? Yeah.
Scott,
I think the
Who can
question-
craft the motion?
That's what I was, if I may, I'd like to make a motion that we recommend, the EDC recommends to the Board of Selectmen that the makeup of the steering advisory committee be comprised of the town staff, 4 to 5 members, members of economic development, members of planning and zoning, housing, 2030, COOPOP, Board of Selectmen, and Board of Recreation Commission. As decided, that membership to be decided by the members of the Board of Selectmen.
That membership and the number of members? Is that
Certainly,
included?
sure.
Was conservation on that list?
If it wasn't, I'd be happy to amend
Yes,
that.
it is.
Okay, so we're gonna let the
Can we-
Board of Selectmen will decide how many
Can we-
members the Board of Selectmen would be.
I think that's the way to go.
Okay.
And that would be my-
We should second the motion and have a
Could we
vote on
repeat
it.
the motion?
And
Yeah,
then we can
certainly,
clarify
yeah.
if you wanna have discussion.
Happy.
I'll second that motion.
But
Thank you.
can we clarify the motion?
Yeah, I'd like to hear
And
it
then
again.
I
I'd like to hear it again.
Let's
I'd like to hear it
Can
again.
we clarify the motion?
My motion is to recommend from the Economic Development Commission to the Board of Selectmen that the steering committee and/or advisory committee for the former CCD master plan be made up of town staff, 4 to 5 members, members of economic development, planning and zoning, housing, 2030, COOPOP, Board of Selectmen, recreation, and conservation, with those membership and the numbers decided by the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
Did you
Anyone
say
want to-
motion?
I did.
Alright, Steve, set. Jared, did you have anything?
Are we allowed to discuss it a little
Right
bit?
now, we are.
Yeah, that's on the table.
The one concern I have is allowing the Board of Selectmen to select how many Board of Selectmen are on the committee, or the advisory group. I do have some concerns of having 3 Board of Selectmen members on there, one because you'll have 2 of one party, 1 of one other party, potentially, or 3 of all one party. I don't think we'd do that. I think we'd end up with 2 of one party, 1 of the other party, which gives, I think, the one party a bigger advantage, slightly, I guess, when you're voting, and the Board of Selectmen in general, a greater advantage because there's now 3 votes for the Board of Selectmen on that advisory committee. It's a concern. I'm not saying we do one way or the other. I think 2 maybe more.
You see Mika as staff, though,
Mika is staff, yes. So
not the selectman in this case.
yes, but in my eyes, he would be considered one of the select.
I would be participating, so.
Participating, but
I'm
this,
just- I'm
Jackie,
bringing it
but
up.
this is a great point, because you used the word voting, okay? And we haven't even covered, like,
Yeah, you're right.
who
We
gets
haven't covered
vote,
the-
like,
we haven't
I
covered the
think what we
process,
wanna
yeah.
say is just like,
Who's the project team?
who's the project team,
Yeah.
right? And then, when it comes to, do we vote, do we not vote, we're advising, okay, so are we voting?
Yeah, I got other
What
comments
kind
for
of
that too.
consensus do we need to get to,
Okay.
right? Like, we gotta work with Cooper Robertson and see their plan and see
Peace.
where do we jump in, right? So, are you,
I'm good.
you're good? All right.
On the basis of that, Cliff, on that motion on the Board of Selectmen choosing how many members of the Board of Selectmen, I mean, in that analogy, so I'm gonna vote no on that, but only on that basis. Because if you put all 5 on the steering committee, advising committee, I don't think you have it. And I think it's incumbent upon us to make a recommendation to make an intransigent committee, one that's able and willing to compromise that goes beyond the life of a Board of Selectmen term. So I think it's incumbent upon us to make a recommendation that we have a representative, one representative from each of these committees to make a committee. So I would be voting no to that motion, but I would accept the friendly amendment to that to make it 1 member from each of those committees, and Mika. which makes it 2 from the Board of Selectmen. I don't care what party, the Martian Party for all I care.
The objective of the of the advisory group is to present, or is to advise,
The
Cooper.
consultant, correct.
and then
To
what
work
is,
with the consultant.
to work with a consultant. Who brings it up to the Board of Selectmen? Who brings that to question?
Right,
Who's gonna
I
bring it up to
agree
the
with
Board of
Mika's change, it's really to work with them, because, you know, in the reality, and I think we've heard Dale say that, in the reality is these consultants are gonna have a lot more experience. We maybe have flexible ideas that we bring to the table, but maybe stifled if we stockpile this with power brokers. But, you know, I think ultimately the consultant's gonna drive this in a long way, and, you know, take the vote at the meeting, but don't put the Board of Selectmen approval meeting. I just never seen an advising committee stocked with the vote. I don't think TP&Z's looking to come in on this. TP&Z, they're appointed, so maybe that's the difference, they're not elected. And maybe that's one of the benefits, that they'll say, look, I'll listen to you, and if you're coming up with a good plan, I'll listen to what it makes sense on the zoning change.
But does
Again, that's my no on
If
that.
the advisory committee is advising and not voting,
As long as we make sure that the advisory committee is advising and that the consultant is doing the job, not the advisory committee's doing
Because
the job,
ultimately-
if that makes sense.
Ultimately, if there was a referendum or a need for money, Board of Selectmen are voting on that anyway.
Yeah, that's
They're
what I'm
gonna-
getting
They're
to.
gonna present that
Yeah.
to them.
That's what I'm getting to. So if you have Board of Selectmen on the advisory committee, in the end, the Board of Selectmen's gonna have the final say anyway. They're gonna have the right to
Yeah.
reject, approve, or modify.
Yeah, and the other thing is, you know, this is not gonna be funded, whatever gets done is not gonna be funded from the town of Woodbridge.
See, I'm not
It's gonna be
dis-
funded from people that are gonna come in to build us a nature center because we're gonna get grants. Or it's gonna be funded from the outside world, chances are, if it has a
Well,
development
there
component.
could be, just reserve the possibility that there could be another grant required, or, you know, as a point of negotiation with a outside party. So, there's a good chance it'll be from all outside, but there is a chance, it's gonna be a negotiation ultimately. They're gonna want something from the town in exchange for X dollars for the property, if that was the case.
That's too far down the road. for
Yeah,
me
yeah,
right now.
exactly. So-
right, so I say we put it to a vote.
Well, if I might still join in on
Sure,
discussion.
absolutely.
Couple of just technical. I think what you should amend it to say is 4 or 5 representatives from the town, including a TPZ representative, not a TPZ member. I'm not sure that TPZ membership can be on another committee.
Okay.
So, what we're really talking about is Chris representing the interest in being our conduit for information
Absolutely.
there and back. So that's just that's a modification I would recommend.
I'm sorry, I didn't really understand the modification.
We said TPZ member, and I'm not sure if TPZ can even be on another committee, be a commission or committee. And in reality, what we're talking about is Chris Sullivan, our building official, who acts as our representative for TPZ in terms of she's a staff
Should be
person.
under staff.
She's town staff,
Got it.
and she's understaffed. So rather than a TPZ member, is what I was suggesting.
So,
Happily accept the
so
amendment.
Chris and a member of TPZ or just Chris?
If you want to put the proviso that we have to understand whether a TPZ member can participate, I'm not sure that they can.
Okay.
Do we also want to put a provision in here that this could all change depending upon input from Cooper Robertson?
I would say no, I think we need to go back to Cooper Robertson with like, this is,
This is what we came up with.
right, and the Board of Selectmen is decided, right?
Okay.
I see this as a continuation of the debate at the Board of Selectmen meeting. And, I see this as in large part a continuation of that debate that they're gonna have, and I think hopefully we provided useful information. I think we could also just table this motion at this point. Hopefully we'll see how many views we have tonight and see what the Board of Selectmen decide. Because it's just a recommendation, so we may be better off just tabling it and thank each other for just the ability to talk freely that we probably couldn't do had they all been here,
Sure.
And so maybe we table it and
We took the motion and seconded.
Exactly, second,
Yeah,
with the amendment.
So I'm gonna,
Around
if
TP.
you wanna take
Mika.
the vote, I'm a no. I'll tell you, I would
Did we
vote for a
second-
table or a one-member.
It's been-
Steve, did you second it?
I second it.
With the amendment.
I'll second it with the amendment.
Okay.
All right, so, all in
we vote.
favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
All opposed? Sorry.
Opposed?
Any abstentions? No.
Okay. All right,
Okay. Very
and
good.
then we will await a response.
I'm sorry, I just recalled it. Maybe it's a different topic, but we didn't really discuss, we don't need to, but in terms of the public involvement in this as well.
Mhm.
So that could be a different topic.
Can we bring up anything regarding that now, or no?
You're still on the topic, so as far as the vote is concerned, the vote was taken.
So my opinion, all the commission members and all the town employees are part of the public. So does that fit the bill?
I mean, and when you look at the scope of work and what went into the bar, there's opportunity for public engagement.
A public engagement, one thing, I'm interpreting that as somebody on the public's part of,
Participation,
Right.
just part of the actual committee?
yes, that's what I'm,
Right, the Board of Selectmen, our committee has now just voted that the Board of Selectmen is gonna determine how many members of the Board of Selectmen are on this advisory committee. And, you know, they can always show up. They pledged in the last meeting, a number of them pledged to show up regardless of whether they're a committee member or not. So they wanna watch what's happening, whether they wanna show up to intimidate or watch on TV, I don't know. But the point is, they're gonna show up regardless of whether they're on the committee or not, which is fine, they're a member of the public. So, but we've voted to,
I would individual would do.
thank you.
Thanks, Deb.
So,
Let's stay for a couple more hours,
Right.
but
We're gonna bring this on.
I wanna
Uh,
try
okay.
to get back to the speeches.
are you around tomorrow?
I am not around tomorrow, but Monday I am.
Monday?
Unless you wanna talk to my grandson.
Oh, that's right,
These are
tomorrow's
the
Friday.
conversations.
Tony, maybe I could set something up for
All right.
Yeah,
Monday.
it's just something
So,
Monday, 'cause there's a
we'll
number
move
of-
on to the
Thank you.
remaining topics here, guys.
Well,
So-
I'm sorry, did we resolve what was said there only because?
I don't know if it'll be resolution at this point, I'm okay.
If I can answer the question you asked, though, no, I feel like the members of the commission have a charge, which puts them in a different place than the general public.
Okay.
So my sense is that the reason I bring it up is because I would feel more comfortable having someone who's not associated with the commission and/or any other position in town, but rather is representing the public to be potentially to be included. And it's not, I'm not saying that I think we should or we shouldn't, it's just something that, if you would consider for future discussion as we have it, something that we will be
So you're
discussing from
envisioning like one individual
one or two.
representing the public.
I'm always a two guy, only one, for and against, you know what I mean? I'm always you want somebody for, you want somebody against, so.
But those meetings would be a public meeting.
Correct.
If they wanna come
But
as
they're
ours.
not, they're not public meetings in the sense of input from the public,
Okay.
those meetings.
So you have your
There
public.
will be public engagement, where that's exactly what we do, is
Right.
we talk to the public and we get their input.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, when you're having the meetings, is there somebody who's completely outside of the town, having what their view is, I think sometimes can be very important.
I would.
And maybe we do it on occasion, as is necessary, or whatever the case may
Okay.
be, but it's just something that I feel carries some value.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. 2030 update. So Scott, Chatty, and I had a chance to, and Mika had a chance to sit in on 2030 last night? It was two nights ago. So the big news there was, if you recall, when we did our walk around the business district, SLR, the consulting firm, we had met with them, but the town was awarded the LOTSIP grant, okay, to cover the project budget, so roughly $7.8 million, and it represents like one of the largest grants in the history of the town. It does exclude the traffic light at Bradley, so if you remember that conversation, the traffic light and crosswalk, the $1 million traffic light, that was not included in the award. So there would be an opportunity for us to go back for another grant in the future in order to bring that to fruition. So, and then we would be supplemented with another $900,000 of ARPA funds that are expiring at the end of the year. So was big news, and really the next steps there, we do need to revisit so from there, we need to get to a contract with SLR, and then ultimately public information meeting, design submissions, and getting to a construction bid. So I think that the end date, the last one that we saw in the timeline, is construction would start roughly a year from now. Just, thinking about, we were just talking about timing and dates and who's here and who's not, right? And end of the project would be like the end of 2026. So it's still pretty far out. Susan did bring up revisiting the placemaking proposal. So that's more of the design side of, all right, when we get the infrastructure built, the next thing would be, the sort of building out the retail housing space down there, as Peary Associates had developed. So we would go back and revisit that with them now that we have the infrastructure down. That would require zoning approvals as well, so that's going to take some time. But was there any other coming out of that that you had, or Mika, that you wanted
Peary,
to add to it?
just the placemaking strategies, because I think that carries, at least when I looked at, I have in front of me their presentation. I don't know that was handed out for our meeting, but it says densify the L. And if you have a question of what the L is, the L, I think that's GBA, and then it turns over to the east. So you take sort of the GBA, remember from the zoning class we did, the GBA, and it takes the L, so it says densify the L, nature forward network.
Right.
Okay, so nature forward network, mixed use development. As we know, we don't have any mixed use except in the GBA other than 55 actives, and then design guidelines.
Right.
So those were the placemaking strategies. Yeah.
Okay, so the other thing I did want to bring up is we are ultimately, 2030 will come in our direction, right? Like we had talked about, and kind of folding into the EDC. So I asked Chatty to be our liaison with 2030 going forward. I think we could have 2 liaisons as I think about it, like rather than just put it all on one person. So, anybody that wants to be a part of that, just let me know. So that really was all I had on 2030. And then in terms of new business, a couple of pieces I did want to bring up. One, I learned last week DeAndrea's Plaza is under contract, right? Which includes
Really?
Cats and Starbucks.
Yeah.
And, it had been out there for a while. So I had reached out to Jeremy this week, and he said, yeah, it's under contract. Of course, I can't tell you who, right? But it represents a potential development opportunity, right? New owners and maybe new vision for that. So that was kind of exciting.
Does that, I'm sorry, Scott, does that plaza include the building behind it where the dance studio is?
Yes.
That's all one plaza?
Right. That entire.
It's owned by the same people and sold.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So that was news. And then, Mika, I think you may have mentioned it earlier about Wheelers under contract to a restaurateur.
Good.
All right. So that's one that we've looked at with Weeds and
That was
everything else
that was catering before.
for quite a while, right? And then
TP&Z had approved a caterer there, and the caterer's not coming.
But this is different. This is not.
The
this is not
caterer was
that.
approved for TPZ for Wheelers, but that
Correct.
caterer's not coming. Right.
That's my understanding, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there was an element of the UPS store too.
They were at some point in time, there was conversations that same owner would use the UPS store as a possible catering type ballroom, small, but you know what I mean?
Okay.
An area where they can have a group type thing.
If I can make a comment on your representation on the 2030 and it's coming our way and that sort of liaison, I think that's the right approach. Liaison, Shadi, that'd be great. 2 comments I have about it. I always want to join a committee and try to make it be helpful, not hurtful. So that's why I've come to participate. I think there's going to be a huge public engagement portion that I haven't seen. I tried to watch as many 2030 meetings as I could, but it seemed, I don't know, I think it's going to be could be a big, pretty thing to discuss at the Board of Selectmen's meeting and the public engagement process when you're going to you're going to be dealing with the big arterials, right? Bradley, Lucy, and Amity. And so that's gonna be not only the people down there, but the people up here, everywhere. That's gonna be the whole town in a public engagement process. And what I read is that that really starts now, all the way through construction, so that's huge, and you have a consultant, that's why it's probably 900 grand. And the other thing is, the thing that's really important to me that I think to understand is that I haven't seen, when they get that CTF, right, there's gonna be a commitment to fund, and they're gonna have to sign off on that, and there are gonna be some terms in that, and they're gonna be discussing that at BOS. But environmental permitting, and, you know, if, we're building sidewalks at this point, but if environmental permitting is required down there, so I'm just thinking you may wanna involve, Board of Selectmen may, you know, cause environmental permitting, if you had that requirement, then what's our end game? You know, we're just building sidewalks, but what is, you know, if we don't know what our end game is on the placemaking, you know, and you're doing environmental permitting, and you're gonna, you know, look at that kind of stuff and obligate yourself for whatever you find, given this. All I'm suggesting is that you may want to, the Board of Selectmen may want to seek out involving this committee more in that process for weighing in on it as that goes on. We're here to help, we're not here to hurt.
Or EDC.
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 Yeah, you may wanna reach out to EDC and say, Shadi, you're the engineer, you know, you know, but you may wanna reach out to other folks that are, and/or.
I agree.
Other than EDC, because it could be a big one.
Yeah, and there may, you know, I'll figure out
It could
how
be
we could figure out
it
how
could be
best
bigger
to
than
do
the
that.
country
Maybe
club.
it's a dual meeting where we get the presentation from SLR in terms of what this is,
Right.
what this initially looks at, so that everybody understands what it is and everybody hears the information and exchanges questions and answers together, so,
Susan and Chris did get back to me, that we need to have a
joint.
more formal kind of
Mhm.
handoff, I guess, so to speak, between.
Yeah, and my only point was, I don't know that it's a handoff, because
I agree, that
it's
this,
not a handoff in that regard. I mean,
Okay.
because it's gonna be complicated, because if you're dealing with a country club and a potential zoning change, you could be dealing with a potential zoning change in the flats at the exact same time. And so, those gotta relate to each other, and that's all good. I mean, this is the fun stuff, this is the good stuff, like Steve Monroe said. This is the good stuff, this is the fun stuff. But let's make it fun.
Okay. The other new business that I had, obviously Toll Brothers, I don't know if everyone has seen, but the other side is, there's progress.
It's getting there.
You know,
The tree trucks were there, I saw that, I
Yeah,
saw
it was
that.
kind of surprising, because we had thought maybe that was not on the
They had,
table anymore.
originally, there was 70 units, north and
Right.
south, 35 on each side, but their declaration that they filed, they had pulled out of the declaration of the condominium, 35 units on the north side. But now that they're cutting the trees, they must,
They
you know,
must- it
must
must
be
have
going for the
changed,
north side,
so-
so they've reserved the right to add them back in, or
Okay.
maybe it's a different association.
So, any other, sorry,
yes, any other new business?
any other new business? Take it
Um,
away.
Did the pharmacy open yet? Do we know?
I believe it was pretty close.
It's very close.
Okay.
It's very close, but that's worthwhile to get some more information on, so I'll see what I can find out, Rick,
Okay, thank
unless somebody else wants to.
I
Oh,
just have,
you do?
I just have one
No.
comment.
Yeah, I saw your hand up.
I just had one comment. We're talking about the country club, we're talking about the down
Lots of-
Bradley Road, the lots of thing. As the town goes forward, and Mika, I think this comment's for you and a little bit for the rest of us. I don't hear about what the town wants, right? I don't hear about what the requirements are for the country club, or the requirements are for downtown. What is Scott was kind of alluding to it, what's the end game for the town? Do we wanna increase revenue, do we wanna have more green space, do we wanna have more people, whatever the end game is?
So,
What is the requirement for all of these folks doing all of these things to our town? So I just wanna make sure that we keep that in mind, and that we don't just start marching without knowing what the goalposts are, so.
that's really where I see the town planner.
I
right?
agree.
And so it's a little disjointed, without a doubt, right? Like, we're, you know, former CCW over here in 2030, and okay, let's come up with a plan, right? It seems a little disjointed, but ultimately, those are elements that, in my view, fit under what the town planner is doing, right? So,
Understood.
as Goldman in New York comes on and begins to do their work, those are realities that they're gonna need to contend with, right? And then the POCD, and we can go on and on, but you're right on, Chatty, it's not perfect, in my view, right? You should start with the vision and like, what does the town want, and where are we going, and then,
Like, is the
I look-
lot zip thing gonna occur before the town planner does their thing?
Well, when you say occur, as Scott Hunter mentioned, it's a process. And as Scott mentioned here, it's a process that's probably gonna take a couple of years.
Yep.
So in terms of, we're engaged with the town planner for 1 year. The town planner, in my view, is the umbrella that we've been looking for to start pulling this together, because we haven't had that before. So we do have separate projects working. We've got schools, we got center building, we've got the fire, we've got a lot of separate projects that I'd like to see us put under a single umbrella, in a view. In terms of your point, or I don't think it was a question, but your point is, yes, there's two separate things. When you said that the town have a vision, here's where I see my responsibility. It's like the town elected me as the first selectman. So it's based on what I said I wanted to, what I felt we should be working toward. And my priority, and what I'm communicating and more times than probably people want to hear it, is what we need more than anything else in the town right now is growth. We need growth. That's the priority. So then it becomes, well, how do you do that, and where does it come from? And that's where the projects start to come in, and now you start pulling together to understand exactly what you need to do in order to make it work. And if I do that here, how does it affect what's going on here, et cetera. This project, this lot zip grant, in my opinion, is more significant than anything we've had in my recent memory. And so it's important that we do exactly what you said. So, okay, we've got $8 million to do things. What's the end result? And right now, from my perspective, what I see, and I believe what the 2030 committee was looking to do, is to provide the opportunity for growth. So to do the things from a transit standpoint that would enable us or put us in a better position to grow. So, and then things like hopefully somebody buys a piece of property and does a development, and those types of things start coming together. So in answer to your question, from my perspective, my vision is growth for the town. It's the only way we can sustain the services that we provide currently, and be able to continue to do the things and maintain the position that we have, particularly in regards to our schools and things of that nature. So I hope that addresses what you're saying, but.
Agreed and understood. Thank you.
And I might say, this is not gonna be popular, and you guys are gonna cringe when I say it, but, I think there's another person at the table that's silent that we don't see, and the Board of Selectmen can't really talk about it, and the TPZ can't really talk about it. But, our zoning and our land use regulations are under discussion. Some people might say they're under attack, and some people might say that we're being assisted. Two different people may come at it, and we're being sued, right? But some people may say they're attacking us, and some people may say they're assisting us. However you come down on that conundrum of why our zoning is under attack, or why they're helping us with our zoning, however you view that, that's political. But I think that's somebody that's at the table, and that a Board of Selectmen and a TPZ is not really equipped because they're the defendant. So in other words, the town is being sued, EDC is not being sued. And this is all recorded, and we have to do so I think we have to be guided and cognizant of that, and I think the Board of Selectmen and the TP&Z are under suit. They're named, and the Board of Selectmen through the town, if you think of them as the town. So I didn't want to hit it hard, but it's another reason why I think as we go forward trying to do the right thing, that there is somebody else at the table that we have to stay up on. I attend every hearing of that suit. I attend in person when there is not a remote one, just to stay informed, to know what's going on. But that they are at the table. Maybe, again, I just wanted to say it, that I think it's important that, to say it, that we need to keep that in mind.
Just one last piece of new business. Thank you. That's a very good point, in my opinion, Scott, and I didn't cringe.
Somebody did.
And my other new business is just that one of our one of our business owners, I think Kate Brown, Kate Cook, has suggested that we would suggested EDC potentially look into where we have empty space, where we have vacant space, the possibility for pop-ups, similar to what they do California, New York, and some of the big metropolitan areas. And they're starting to do it more in Connecticut and Hartford and some other places with some success. And she, just as an idea, she suggested that maybe that's something that would be worth discussing and looking at and finding out a little bit more about. I think it's a very novel and interesting idea, which makes it very appealing from my perspective. I like novel and interesting. But we were hopeful, I was trying to see if maybe we can get on the agenda today and see if she might be able to come down and explain a little bit more, but she's available next meeting, I believe, Tony?
Yes.
And if we want to, like, ask some questions or exchange some information or look into it, I just wanted to bring it up as new business
Yeah.
and see if we can
Yeah.
make anything of it, if there's anything there.
I'll connect with Kate.
Thank you.
Okay.
Motion to, oh, sorry.
Well, so next meeting, September 12th, as we just mentioned.
Yep.
Public comment.
Oh, and, sorry, public comment.
Is
Okay.
there any- Is there any?
Is there any? Next meeting, September 12th. And then I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks,
Okay.
guys.
Thanks.